President Trump is stepping up his attacks against special counsel Bob Mueller in the ongoing Russia investigation. In a series of tweets Sunday, the president wrote, quote, "Is Robert Mueller ever going to release his conflicts of interest with respect to President Trump, including the fact that we had a very nasty and contentious business relationship? I turned him down to head the FBI one day before his appointment as SC, and Comey is his close friend. Also, why is Mueller only appointing angry Dems, some of whom have worked for crooked Hillary, others, including himself, have worked for Obama?" I have to point out, Robert Mueller worked for Democrats and Republicans. The president is telling a lie when he says it's 12 angry Democrats working for Robert Mueller. In the last hour, President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, doubled down on those attacks without offering any more details about Mueller's alleged conflicts of interest.
What does he mean? This is quite attention-grabbing. What contentious business relationship?
It's good that it's attention-grabbing.
Yeah, but it's not good in terms of the facts, because
when you're getting beaten up by all kinds of anonymous tweets, you know, coming from Lanny Davis and Cohen, and the press is actually, for the first time, actually acknowledging that you're not doing it, and you put out something like that, you have every right to say, okay, you explain it, Mueller. Stand up and be a man.
Wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. How can the president make this claim and not support it?
He doesn't have to.
Why is it up to Robert Mueller to have to support the president's tweet?
Because he has the conflict, not the president.
Stand up and be a man. I'm going to sit down and be a woman. My takeaway from Rudy Giuliani there, he's now saying collusion, it's not a crime, not denying that the president colluded. And suddenly, that 2016 Trump Tower meeting that the president knew nothing about, he no longer says the president knew nothing about it. He simply says the president didn't attend it. Thanks, Rudy. We knew he never went. I want to bring in Natasha Bertrand, staff writer for The Atlantic and an MSNBC contributor, Seth Waxman, a former federal prosecutor and partner at the law firm Dickinson Wright, and Mark and Rick back with me. Natasha, to you first, what do you make of what you just heard?
It's not surprising in the least. I mean, they clearly are terrified that Cohen has more recordings of the president that will come out in, you know, the Southern District of New York, which of course coordinates very closely with Bob Mueller. But this is also, I think it would be a mistake to think that this is not a strategy and that it's just kind of the president going off on Twitter in one of his angry tweet storms. The president understands the power of repetition, and, you know, we're very close to the midterm elections. And so I think that this is definitely a strategy to kind of consolidate his base and kind of rally them around this idea that the Mueller investigation is a witch hunt, a conspiracy, because this talking point that Mueller has conflicts of interest, that was put out there by the president's team in the very early days of Mueller's appointment. The whole talking point, the whole idea that Mueller was conflicted out, that he couldn't possibly carry out this appointment credibly, was used from the very beginning to undermine the entire investigation. So that is not a new strategy, but of course it is also factually inaccurate because ethics advisors have said that he has no conflict of interest.
But Natasha, you and I both know this. We cover the White House. We speak to people in the White House. The president and his administration only use this line that Robert Mueller has conflicts of interest when they're speaking publicly, when their base could see it. When you speak to people in the White House, do they ever give you this line? Because they never give it to me, because I think they know it's straight up a lie.
No, and that's why I say that it's a strategy to kind of rally his base around these accusations. It's all part of the show. It's all part of trying to convince his supporters that Mueller was conflicted from the start. It's not something that internally they think is actually true, because they, of course, are trying to negotiate with Mueller a potential sit-down interview, and they're trying to kind of limit the scope of what that interview would look like. So they need to kind of have this, you know, at least on the inside, this kind of working relationship with Bob Mueller's team. But on the outside, of course, they can continue to attack him. And I think it's really rich that Rudy Giuliani says that it's on Mueller, who, of course, has led this investigation very, very quietly without saying a word to the press or to anyone, really, that it's on him to prove that he does not have these conflicts of interest, when, of course, it's the president who, of course, is showing that he's extremely scared of what's to come.
Oh, well, the president, and we mentioned it earlier, sort of governs by news cycle. Rick, Republicans, respectable long-term Republicans on the Hill, more and more are publicly standing shoulder to shoulder with Robert Mueller. And while that might not be the Devin Nunes, Jim Jordan camp, does it not hurt the president when he continues to say this about Bob Mueller? What does Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, Lindsey Graham think of that?
Look, I just don't think they're going to get into this. Look, they've shown no leadership on this. The problem is, look, Natasha said it because Mueller hasn't said a word, right? He's not putting out daily press releases. He's not doing Twitter rants.
I don't even know what his voice sounds like.
He's not doing press conferences. The only people, and Giuliani has become a full Trump franchise. In other words, emblazoned a gold Trump on top of his head because he gave an interview that was incoherent. It just doesn't make, all of what he's saying doesn't make any sense. The reason the Mueller investigation is in the news every day is because of the White House and Donald Trump. Mueller's not causing any news. They're not releasing anything. So wait till the investigation's over. And he says, no, you can't do that because all these anonymous things, it's just this whole conspiracy. And if you go back to the beginning, it's always, this is the way it progresses. Well, we didn't know about the Russia meeting. Oh, well, what if we did? Oh, we didn't collude. Oh, but what if we did? So what?
Collusion's not a crime, he says.
On and on and on. It keeps getting, it's like inches forward, and his own supporters say, but that's not a crime, and that's not a crime, and that's not a crime. Well, conspiracy is a crime. Mm-hmm.
Oof. All right, Seth, you understand crime. Giuliani didn't stop there this morning. I want to share what he said about Michael Cohen and the tapes.
Why did you waive the attorney-client privilege for the Cohen tapes?
Because I know the whole tape, and I could bring out parts of the tape. For example, if I didn't waive it, I wouldn't be able to tell you that he cuts it off abruptly, which he does, right after the word check. More likely is he came back home, he erased the portion that he wanted erased, and then he tried to tape record a conversation. It appears with Don Jr. He might have gotten that too, and then he erased that. The second conversation is clearly about another subject. It may
What
not
second
even
conversation?
on the tape.
Yeah.
He ends the conversation with the word check from the president. Check.
For the hush money?
Let me finish. Then, about 3 seconds later, you hear him say Don Jr. He might not even be talking to Don Jr. He may be saying Don Jr. is going to come here. Don Jr. isn't going to come here.
Yes, so
we don't
what?
know that.
What does any of that have to do with the hush money for the Playboy
tapes.
model?
He was doctoring tapes. He doctored at the word check, he cut the tape off.
Okay, Seth, what's the legal strategy here? And from a legal perspective, will it work?
Well, I mean, this is out of the defense manual 101 we all get when we graduate law school. You know, you got a guy that's close to your target, your client in this case, and he's in the process of flipping or turning on you, so you attack his credibility. It turns out he has a tape on your client. Well, it must be doctored. You know, I always found it funny when defense lawyers used to accuse me as a prosecutor of being in bed with a cooperator, kind of sponsoring their lies. And I would turn around to a jury and say, look, this isn't my guy. You were with him for 10 years. He was your consigliere. He was your fixer man. And now you blame me? I mean, when there's a criminal conspiracy, you want to learn about that conspiracy. Those are bad people on the inside. They're liars. They're thieves. They're murderers, or whatever the crime may be. You're not going to have, you know, Mother Teresa or the Pope to tell you about a criminal conspiracy. And so I would end my pitch to a jury by saying, you know, when you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. In this case, I'm not quite sure which is the dog and which is the flea, but, you know, this is kind of, you know, par for the course for defense lawyer tactics, and I'm not surprised to see Mr. Giuliani trot some of this stuff out.
But does it work? Mark, I turn to you. We could look and snicker at Rudy Giuliani and say he's behaving like a crazy Uncle Grandpa. But does it work? And do the crazy Uncle Grandpas and others who watch believe it? Because there's a CBS poll out there that says 91% of strong Trump supporters trust him for accurate information, while only 11% trust the mainstream media.
Well, it describes that group, strong Trump supporters. And they are, I think, in all the demographics, probably the greatest minority in this political discourse. What counts are those moderates, those independents, and obviously our party, the Democratic Party. There are more of us than there are of them. Those numbers also show this. I'm not surprised about the strong Trump supporters. Giuliani is playing to that audience. He is an anarchist. It's to create confusion and give them something, those strong Trump supporters, something to talk about, something to hold on to. But it is pretty damning for them to now be saying, first of all, that collusion is not a crime. So are we admitting to collusion now? Actually, I thought this morning, and Seth's the attorney here, and now I'm wondering if Rosenstein and Mueller weren't ingenious to use the term collusion instead of conspiracy. Now, any one of us who can read between the lines know that collusion leads to conspiracy. Collusion itself on the books is not a crime. But if they had said conspiracy on the front end, we know Trump would have lost his mind and tried to shut the whole thing down. So, you know, that's something that I think we ought to think about as well. But when we look at the charges with Manafort, we look at the charges with the Russians, they all say conspiracy. They don't say collusion. And so I think that coming down the pike, if this gets to its logical conclusion, first, another thing, too, I've never heard anyone attacking a prosecutor in the way. That's one thing you don't do. When you're under investigation, the last thing you want to do is antagonize the prosecutor. So I think Giuliani is not working. I think he is doing his client in.
Well, that would be a true beast move if Rosenstein and Mueller had been holding back on conspiracy and only floating out there collusion. Natasha, what do you make of the timing of suddenly these aggressive, renewed attacks on the part of Trump and Giuliani? To Rick's point earlier, when the president could have been taking a victory lap off of Friday's GDP number.
Well, that big news broke about how Michael Cohen apparently is willing to testify that the president not only knew about but approved of the Trump Tower meeting. And of course, we also know that Michael Cohen has dozens, if not hundreds, more recordings of the president, of speaking to the president or talking about the president with reporters. So I think it really goes back to that. I think that they're terrified of what Michael Cohen could come out and say. And, you know, it's really funny that they are trying now to paint Michael Cohen as a liar. Of course, months ago, Giuliani was saying that he is a credible person, that he's just completely flipped his perception of Michael Cohen. And you have to ask, well, who was Michael Cohen lying on behalf of over the last decade and a half? He worked for the president. And I think that Seth made a really good point. When you lie down with dogs, you're going to get fleas. He's not going to be a perfect witness. And of course, when he goes to court, prosecutors are not going to rely solely on his word. But we also have to remember that he is testifying, or he plans to testify, that there were others in the room when the president approved of this Trump Tower meeting. And that meeting, you know, I think was really a turning point in this campaign. If they can prove that Trump approved of it, then that's a really big deal.
But before we go, Seth, can you elaborate on how credible a witness Michael Cohen can really be? I mean, the guy is a sleazebag and a liar. And while he may have decided a week ago, I'm going to do the right thing, is it too little too late?
No, not at all. He can be entirely credible if he's corroborated. If you have other cooperators that say the same thing, let me posit a hypothetical to you. Paul Manafort flips. He says exactly what Michael Cohen says about those meetings. I heard Mr. Giuliani just last hour state that Rick Gates was in one of the meetings leading up to the Trump Tower meeting, where presumably the Trump Tower meeting purpose was discussed. Rick Gates is already a cooperator. You match up those cooperators, you add in some emails, an email to Don Jr. where he says he loves it, and you get whatever else there is corroboration-wise, these phone calls to an unblocked or to a blocked number, and Mr. Trump just days before the Trump Tower meeting saying, hey, something big's coming down the pike. And then to add on to that, 3 days after that Trump Tower meeting, Julian Assange goes public and says, I've got tape or I've got emails on Hillary I'm going to release. It doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar to see that maybe, just maybe, what happened was that the Trump team and the Russians decided to get this stuff out, knew they couldn't put their own fingerprints on it, and released it through WikiLeaks. I mean, I'm speculating there, but again, these are connecting the dots that aren't too tough to connect, especially for someone like Bob Mueller.
Well, Seth, I'm very confused by all this timing, but to your point, you know who isn't? Bob Mueller. All right, great conversation. We have to leave it there.